Well, hello and welcome everyone. Today I have a very special guest for you guys, and his name is Tom Arra. He's been a product owner at Nokia, Microsoft, and BMW. In fact, the official My BMW app is built in Flutter because of the decisions made by people like Tom. He then went on to direct the product development team at Very Good Ventures and is now an operations lead at Shorebird. I had a really good introduction recorded with him. Unfortunately, OBS started dropping frames, so I had to cut that part out. And you'll have to be patient for like the first 20 seconds when Tom answers my second question, which was, how did you get started on programming?
Yeah, so computers have always been like my fascination growing up. There was like zero doubt when I was in, grade school, high school, whatever, that I was going to be doing computer science. I enjoyed, just sitting in front of the screen and making things. But as I started to learn more and more about that, I realized, well, I didn't really like the low level stuff. I really liked more of the like, how do we get stuff on the screen? How do we make it function well? Like really what I learned turned into really just application development rather than like backend or servers or anything else in the development space. So that's what I really tried to kind of focus on. I spent a number of years being both an intern and an engineer or senior engineer, tech lead, just to get that part of my background up and running. And I kind of always felt like I'd probably end up more in the managerial and product space of things because I am pretty good at organizing teams, organizing people. But I kind of I had a lucky break into that because at Nokia, the product I was working on, which was a Windows Phone app, Nokia Express, it was a web browser. The product manager that we had assigned to us, where I was the tech lead, he pretty much kind of had like one foot out the door as he was kind of getting us up and running. So I ended up making a lot of product level decisions just to keep me and the team running forward. So unfortunately, then he left the company, and everybody just kind of looked at me going, well, Tom, you're already kind of doing that job. Why don't you just do it for real? So that's when I moved over to the product and program management side of things and kind of haven't looked back since then. So that was about, I don't know, 2010, 2012, somewhere in there. Yeah, I've enjoyed it because I get to, I think, utilize my skill set pretty well, but also still be involved day to day with engineers and really understand what we're building, why we're building it. Even though maybe I can't, write the code like they can, I can still kind of understand what it is we're building and make sure that we're delivering the right thing for whoever our customer is.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. That you do not need to be assigned a specific role or be explicitly told to do certain things, but you just picked up those things and eventually they were all handed out to you.
Yeah, that's I think just a little bit of my own nature of if I see a gap, I tend to figure out, okay, is that something that I can fill? Do I need help to fill that? Because especially if it, or the other side of that is, hey, is this something that can just fall off the wagon for a little bit, right? And we can deal with it later. That's I think kind of led me in a lot of my career to, like you kind of said, making some of those jumps that I have, and sometimes I enjoy them, other times not, but at least it's a learning process.
Yeah, it definitely is. In fact, I'll keep this in mind as I progress through my career. So, your bio says that you help organize corporate chaos to make the best solutions for customers. First of all, that's a great line, which I definitely plan on stealing when I get to that position. It would be insightful if you can elaborate on the kind of chaos that you've dealt with.
Yeah. So the reason I use that phrase is really just based in my time at large organizations. Um, my first exposure to this was at Nokia. I was part of a startup that got bought by Nokia, and so we went from about 150 people in the company to thousands upon thousands across the entire world. Um, Looking back at it, I didn't realize Nokia was really well set up to be a global company from the start. They had factories everywhere, they had offices everywhere. They really knew how to communicate, not just with their teams, but like their employee base all over the world, and kind of get everybody moving in the same direction. Unfortunately, we all know Nokia is not really around today. So, they missed the boat a little bit on some of the technology shifts. But a lot of the, I think, things I learned back then are what I've then been able to apply to some of my other roles, including Microsoft and BMW, where I spent 6 or 7 years between the two. And the corporate chaos that I talk about is really around everybody chasing their own KPIs or goals or whatever it is, and not really thinking about the bigger picture of what is it that we're doing as a company, or what are we doing as multiple departments working together to get to a certain customer or get to a certain outcome. One of the best projects that I was ever involved with at BMW, that was able to kind of break those lines down, was I was a presenter and at CES for a number of years at BMW. And for some reason, everybody that was associated with that show and being there, the department codes and lines of, no, this is your responsibility versus someone else's responsibility, just kind of fell down. And everybody knew, like, no, we needed to kind of come together and pull together and provide the best show experience for everybody that was there in Las Vegas with us. Then you would kind of pull that back after the show into your daily work. In that case, I was working on the mobile applications, and it was sometimes very frustrating to see all these artificial lines being drawn. It's like, no, we can break those down. We can get rid of some of that in order to make sure that I'm not frustrated, you're not frustrated, our customers are not frustrated, and actually deliver what we want to. So I think that's maybe a little bit of background there. I definitely have some detailed examples that I probably shouldn't share, just company wise. But yeah, it's a lot about, I think, breaking down those walls and just getting people across divisions, across organizations, even sometimes across companies, just working well together.
By the way, I'd be very interested in getting into those details examples after we are done with this meeting. So you were a product owner at Nokia itself, right?
Yeah, I started at Nokia, and then that transitioned over to Microsoft when the mobile phones division got bought by Microsoft. But yeah, I started as a product owner on that Windows Phone application back at Nokia.
So I wanted to understand that apart from ensuring that everyone has an idea of the bigger picture, what are some absolute duties of a product owner?
Yeah, I think that's the big one, is realistically, when I first kind of got into that role, I did a lot of reading, did a lot of, just studying on, like, hey, what do people say that this role should be? And the phrase at the time that everybody kind of used, and I think it's still somewhat prevalent, is like, you're the CEO of that product or that product area, right? Like, and you need to be able to communicate a clear vision, goal, outcome that everybody that's working with you is marching towards. And so I took that to heart, and that's kind of been my philosophy for a lot of things, right? If I can sit down with everybody and anybody who's working on whatever project or product with me and say, this is the end goal, maybe it's a month away, maybe it's a year away, maybe it's 5 years away, but at least we can have a clear conversation of how do we get from point A to point B. I think that helps everybody involved to make sure that, number one, we're delivering the right thing for whoever our customer is. But then number two, everybody kind of has a sense of purpose of, hey, even though I'm working on this one little bug ticket, I know that it's going to fix some other feature or unlock some other capability that will allow us to get further down our roadmap. Those are not always the easiest things to come up with, right? And sometimes you're just looking at the blank wall of, like, okay, what is it that we're doing? And so sometimes it takes a little bit of time alone trying to figure that stuff out. But then you have to be able to not just communicate it, but also get people to understand why. That's been my key so far. I mean, there's also, going back to your original question, right? As a product manager or product owner, right? There's always the day-to-day stuff, right? You got to attend Scrum meetings. You got to make tickets. You got to write down feature feature documentation, like all of that stuff. But I feel like all of that just kind of naturally falls out of making sure that direction is set the right way.
Makes sense. Coming to your time at BMW, initially they must have had native applications, right? So why did the team decide to go with a hybrid framework, and how did you guys lock in on Flutter?
Yeah, there was an evolution there at BMW. When we joined, their mobile system was very, let's say, fragmented. If you had a 7 Series car, you would download this app. If you had an electric car, you would download this app. If you had a 5 Series, you would download a different one. Because from a car integration perspective, those were all very different cars. They were very different pieces of hardware. But BMW started to coalesce everything together into a single car platform that would then be modified as needed. So that made it a little bit easier for us to say, hey, we should make this as easy as possible from a consumer perspective. When you buy a BMW, you should download the one BMW app, right? And no matter how many BMWs you own, if it's just one or a fleet, you should be able to see them all in one application and manage them. See the status, execute remote functions, all that stuff. So step one was really starting from scratch and rebuilding all of that using native apps to get down to that one application. So it made it really easy for dealers who were selling cars, during the delivery process to just say, okay, let's grab your phone, let's download the one app, let's get you set up. That was how we started back in 2014, 2015. At the time, it was called BMW Companion. And we really focused on iOS first. BMW has had a long partnership with Apple. In fact, they were the first auto OEM to provide, way back when, the 30-pin dock connector in cars. So you could plug your iPod in and access it all within the stereo. So they've been really long partners with Apple. So we started and we were mostly focused on iOS. Once we got the first version of the iOS app out and into the public, they said, okay, time to make the Android app. But we had 5 or 6 development teams working on the iOS app. We had one working on the Android app. So the Android app very quickly fell behind when it came to feature set, maintenance, bug fixes, all of these other things. This continued for a handful of years. And finally, around end of 2018, beginning of 2019, our VP at the time came to us and said, hey, we need to come up with a technology solution to this issue of keeping these two apps together and in sync, because we were getting a lot of customer complaints, right? We'd implement a new feature that was awesome on iOS, and the marketing team would start to go out and market it. But then we'd get a lot of backlash from customers saying, but where is it on Android? And we just didn't have the capacity or velocity to make it happen right away. So the team there, they grabbed about 3 or 5 engineers, I think it was. I said, hey, we're going to send you guys off on a little bit of a vision quest for the next handful of months to explore some different technologies, see if this is feasible, do some research, talk to some other companies and products that are out there, and figure out a direction for us. Fun fact, and if you listen to some of my previous colleagues' talks, like Jorge Coca or Felix Angelov, they'll be the first ones to tell you that at that time, we didn't select Flutter to begin with. There was a lot of options on the table. Flutter was looked at as, okay, well, maybe there's something here, but it wasn't the front runner. In fact, they were going down a different path, more using native code, but following standard practices and guidelines around architecture, with what was called the RIBS framework. They spent about a month playing with that and realizing that they were going to fall back into the same issue. And during that time, the folks over at Google and the Flutter team made a lot of progress on some of the key issues that they had brought up. And so all of a sudden they said, oh, maybe there's something here. And so I think around the beginning of 2019, maybe middle of 2019, the decision was finally made to say, okay, let's go full force into Flutter. We should rebuild the whole application and make sure that we're starting fresh. And other parts of the company really enjoyed that, because then that meant they got the chance to put in things like a new design and look and feel. New features can get added into the roadmap, things like that. So it was a large effort, but that's where BMW is today. And I still have contact with a handful of the folks over there back in Munich. And they keep telling me hey man, 80 to 90% of everything you guys put in place at the beginning is still what we use today, which is great to hear.
Yeah, that's a legacy at this point. Coming to hybrid app development frameworks, I'm sure you guys must have paid attention to React Native as well, given that it has a great community. What were the reasons because of which React Native was no longer a viable option?
It was definitely on the table. One of the things that BMW was very, and I'm sure they still are, opinionated about was their design is their design, and they want to make sure that that design is used everywhere. And so as some of those technologies were being looked at, we were looking at it through the lens of, we knew that this new UI UX overhaul was coming. What technology would work well for this, and we wouldn't have all of the fragmentation issues that we were having. So something like React Native could get us there most of the way, but there was still going to be a lot of, individual per platform or per screen size or any of that stuff, code that was going to have to be written. Whereas with Flutter kind of out of the box and just being able to essentially take over the whole canvas, we could make our wildest designers' dreams come true pretty easily, as compared to what we were doing both with the native apps and what we were doing with some of the other frameworks. And the performance that came out of it, I think, was the other thing that the designers and testers and validators saw right away. That was like, hey, this not only does this look good, but it also performs very well even on really old hardware, which was something we were battling with some of our older and native implementations.
That's actually really interesting. So were there any other hybrid frameworks that your team considered before deciding upon Flutter?
Yeah, and I mean, the other one that was on the table that we've talked about as well was Xamarin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when it was at that time, right? Xamarin was a big player there. We had a lot. In fact, we were a very big Microsoft partner. The whole application backend was hosted in Azure, so we used our reps over there to say, hey, we'd love to talk to some of the folks about Xamarin. And they listened to some of our use cases. They listened to our requirements, and they actually kind of said themselves like, I don't think this is really going to be the one solution you guys really need. Mostly because the BMW and Mini applications not only have that Flutter side of things, but they also integrate pretty deeply with some hardware components as well, right?
Yeah.
Things like the car key, that's part of PassKit and things like that from Apple. Remote software update, which they do through the application, right, is actually communicating from the device directly back to the car with a direct connection. And so for that, they always had to drop down into this native layer in order to make sure things were working well. So looking at all of the other options, Flutter was one of the ones that kind of supported all that stuff really well out of the box. And we knew that we weren't going to be like creating a really bad shim layer between everything to make it all work.
Wow, I actually completely forgot about Xamarin, and your reasoning for not going for it was actually quite insightful as well. Now, coming to Very Good Ventures, I really admire their work. It's just top notch, the way they push the boundaries of Flutter and the way they actively contribute in the Flutter open source community. So can you elaborate on your role at VGV?
Yeah. So like I said, unfortunately, BMW made the decision to shut down the office in Chicago. So that had me looking for a new role. I wanted to stick with Flutter. I thought the ecosystem made sense. I thought the technology made sense. I enjoyed having some of the conversations that we had with some of the community members when we were back at BMW. And I was lucky that Felix Angelov and Jorge Coca were already at Very Good Ventures for a year at this point. They had been there, kind of helped build up a little bit of that engineering team. And when they heard BMW was shutting down, they called me up right away and said, hey, it's time for you to come over here, man. We need some help. And so I joined VGV in order to actually start more of the product and program side of things rather than engineering. What was happening was the company was around 15, maybe 20 people at the time. which was growing just enough that you had senior engineers having to do things like talk with clients and understand requirements, plan resourcing, and make sure that we have the right people on the right projects, deal with invoicing and hours tracking and all this other stuff, right? All of the kind of, let's call them necessary evils to running a consulting service, but nowhere near the skill set of someone who's a senior engineer in Flutter who just really wants to be writing code all day. So I came in and established the first program management team, grew that for a handful of years, and really tried to work on all of our kind of business operations overall, make sure that we had a really repeatable process for clients that were coming in and working with us, not just from the engineering side, which is what Jorge and Felix spent a lot of time working on, but also from just an experience in interacting with VGV. So did that for about 3 years or so, was able to build that team up from nothing to, I think the most we got to was about 6 or 7 program managers, who were, each one had somewhere between 2 to 4, sometimes even clients that they were working with at any given time. And grew the company overall from about, like I said, 15, 20 people to well over 100 during that time as well. So it was a lot of fun doing that. Then I was looking for kind of my next challenge and looking at what was around available to me, like at VGV, and thought, hey, I think there's some more work that we can do with some of this product stuff that we're doing, right? Some of our, like you mentioned, open source packages, things that we use as a tool, let's say, in our own work that maybe other folks would want to be able to use or even buy from us. And so during my last year and a half or so that I was at VGV, I spent trying to build that up a little bit more. If you look at the Very Good Ventures website right now, a lot of the stuff is around, the product stuff is around like Very Good Start, the Flutter training, things like that are essentially not like pure consulting services, but like one-off purchases to kind of help supplement a consulting service. But again, all rooted in Flutter, because that's where VGV really kind of got their foothold, and getting started was being first in the Flutter game with the Hamilton application, who's still one of their clients. So long-running relationship there. It was very rare that a project came to us or a client came to us, described their problem, and we would have to say no. Like every time we would say yes, because Flutter would be the thing that could solve the issue that they were facing. So it was a lot of fun. So I was there for about a little over 4 years.
So you were actively involved in hiring and growing teams at VGV. Were you hiring engineering candidates or were you handling the business side of things?
Yeah, so my team was mostly on the business side, but especially when the company was smaller, I was involved with a lot of the engineering hires that we did as well, just so that they had a sense of what this other program and product team was really doing inside the company. And so, yeah, I was involved in a lot of those engineering discussions as well. In fact, a lot of the very first interviews that I did at VGV back in beginning of 21, there was a lot of folks that we hired that were maybe just a couple years out of school or even just right out of school. But you could kind of see during that interview, oh, this person knows what they're doing. And those are, I think, right now some of the star performers that VGV has, where they've been able to kind of grow them over time and really ingrain them in like the good engineering practices, understanding the community, all the stuff that you said of like, hey, people know VGV and why. Those are the folks who have been able to kind of live it and breathe it as their career has started to grow. And it was a lot of fun working with all of them.
Since you were also involved in the engineering hires, and this one's for all the Flutter developers watching, in your experience, are there any areas which candidates tend to ignore regularly or lack in consistently?
Yeah. No, I think the biggest one is we would end up usually, like many places, doing some sort of like sample project just to see how they would implement things. And it was always very interesting to take a look at their implementations, but also the flip side of that was not just the implementations, but the architecture behind it and how it was tested. I think that was the big thing that was interesting to me at the beginning was when I was an engineer, it was very unit testing was starting to become the fashionable thing. And I completely understood it and why it made a lot of sense, but there was always a lot of pushback. And I feel like that, it takes time to write those tests, it takes time to maintain them, all these other things. And I feel like that topic overall kind of goes in waves. Like it's at some point, a lot of stuff breaks and everyone goes, oh man, we need to automate testing for all of it. And then people kind of swing the other way of saying, oh, we don't have the time to write all of it. And so the going back to your question of like where I would see people get tripped up, I would see them maybe get really crafty or let's say tricky with some of their implementations, but then they would have a really hard time actually testing it and making sure that it worked 100% of the time in an automated fashion. And at VGV, where we were moving very, very quickly for a lot of our clients, right? A client is coming to you not just for your knowledge, but also like they need to be accelerated. We need to be able to make sure that not only are implementations good, but also the team is able to move fastly and not break things behind them. So that testing aspect was a big deal, I think, overall.
So essentially, the recruiter is looking to evaluate their thought process behind implementing a certain feature, and developers generally seem to lack the knowledge in writing tests.
Yeah, and I think it's something that once you get exposed to it, you understand the power behind it and why it's important and everything else. But a lot, including myself, right? When I graduated from college and got my first job as an engineer, unit testing was not a thing that we were doing at the startup like that we worked at, right? Like we just needed to do everything that we could to keep the lights on and keep customers coming in the door. We didn't have time for unit tests, but as things start to grow and as complexity goes up, being able to have that in our back pocket as kind of an easy card to play to understand, like, hey, are things working the right way? Really starts to grow and show in your process overall.
Yeah, so now that we are discussing unit testing, knowing just unit testing is not enough, right? Like Flutter supports integration testing, end-to-end automated testing. So what are your thoughts on that?
Agreed. Yes. So I think that I actually helped write one of the articles on the Very Good Ventures website that I still sometimes point people back to today, of saying, hey, not everything needs to be unit tested. There are many different types of tests that are out there. Pick the one that makes the most sense for you, right? Like if for some reason your code maybe is in like an inherited code base and you can't really refactor everything because you're still understanding all of it, great. You could probably start with some integration or end-to-end tests that you can use tools to create just to make sure when you make a change, something else doesn't break. And then as you start to decouple everything or get things broken down into individual components or objects or whatever, then you're able to better test those individual little things and then just kind of boost your confidence over time. That was a pattern we would see a lot at working with clients. We'd be coming in because they needed help rather than they were starting from scratch. They needed help with the problem they already had with their current code base. And that was a solution we employed a few times that I think worked pretty well. But yeah, I think I'll take any testing versus no testing, no matter the type of test that it is, just to, from the program and product side of things, right? It's nice to be able to look at a dashboard or look at a report and say, hey guys, are we 100% or do we have some failures? Okay, where are those failures at? Do I think that they're business critical? To be able to like make some decisions of should we move forward or do we need to like pause for a second and get our house in order again.
Yeah, so I actually have a question related to the regrouping part. You must have been in situations where stuff just gets too out of hand and you just have to be like, okay, everyone, pause and let's not do anything unless this specific task has been addressed. I have been in such situations where that was told to our team. And since you've worked at such large scale, I'd like to understand how these things are handled at that level. If you can share a specific incident.
Yeah, during my time at BMW, one of the groups that I helped manage was what we called after sales. So essentially all the features inside the application that would drive users back into a dealership. So scheduling a service appointment, roadside assistance, recall notifications, things like that. And it was a pretty big team, 30, 40 people, including designers, developers, engineers, QA testers. And we had a lot of work going on, but also we got into this point where everything became very fragile. We did a lot of good work that was able to deploy some new features out into the market, and they were able to be used. Like a great example of this was service appointment booking. We were able to launch it in a couple countries, and then the business came to us and said, "Great, we need to turn it on for 5 more." And we started to look at the architecture, and the team started looking at it going, I don't know how well this is going to work, Tom. I think we might need to take some time to actually like redo some stuff so that we have this scalability. And this was, so it was a little bit more driven from the engineering side. Took me some time to kind of understand, okay, why is this happening? What's the desired outcome from the engineering side? What does it take to get there? And then I was able to go back to the business side and say, hey, in this case, like, in order to get to your requirements and your deadlines that you're looking for, I need a combination of no other changes or no other priorities for X amount of time. And I probably also need to reassign some people from other stuff that they were working on to focus on this. So just like really being able to say, can I pause everything else? Make sure that, you know, we're focused on this one thing to get it right, because we think that this is going to be the thing that kind of unlocks a lot of customer value and business value for us overall. And those are never fun discussions, right? People never want to be told no, but sometimes it's a necessary evil just to make sure that you, going back to what we were saying before, right, that you can get to that bigger picture. Because let's be honest, in that scenario, the goal wasn't just to turn on service appointment booking for 5 countries. It was, the goal was to turn on for 100 countries. And if we can't do it for 5, we're certainly not going to do it for 100. So that's, I think, some of my own experience in that, and advice is really, you know, if you have all of your information and you can have clear conversations with not just your stakeholders, but your developers, your implementers, like everybody else, again, you can get everybody back on the same page and kind of marching to the same beat.
That was actually super interesting, and yeah, I'm glad that you went into such details. All right, I think it's time to talk about Shorebird. And for the people who are not familiar with it, can you just explain what Shorebird is?
Yep. So Shorebird is a new-ish company. It's been around about 2 years now. But the main goal of Shorebird is to be able to make businesses successful with Flutter. And how we do that is through building new products that they can take advantage of. The one that we're really pushing right now, and we've spent a lot of time developing, is our instant update or code push technology that allows teams to be able to quickly and easily deploy updates to their application on their own schedules without having to submit new patches and new app binaries to app stores for review, whether that's Apple, Google, Microsoft on the Windows Store, you know, all of those. The team has spent a lot of time making sure that all of this implementation is done by the letter of the guidelines, so that we're not getting in trouble with the app stores. So all of the work that is done is following those app store guidelines. That's why we work specifically with Dart code and Dart functionality rather than native. So that's how we're able to make sure we're adhering to all of those guidelines, but still provide a very valuable service to a lot of customers. So right now we have hundreds of customers who are sending out millions of patches a day, and that's all around the world. We've got developers Asia, Europe, US, everywhere. So it's slowly growing, but that's the first foray that we've made into this kind of making businesses more successful with Flutter mission.
A question that I keep asking myself about Shorebird is, how does it even work?
Yeah, so Shorebird is meant to be almost a seamless integration for you as a Flutter developer, right? The only thing that we change is really your build command. So rather than doing Flutter build, you're doing Shorebird build. And that's allowing us to kind of be inserted into the build process and be able to help you manage your releases. What we do then is you have, number one, you have full control over everything that's happening with Shorebird. We never see your code and source code. We don't ask for GitHub access or anything like that. No source access whatsoever. Everything is being done locally. Only when you say, hey, there's a new release that I want to push up to Shorebird, or here's a new patch that I want to create, is when our services get involved. And for some folks, they like to do all that manually. We definitely have some teams who just have Shorebird integrated into their nightly CI/CD pipeline. So every night there's a new build that comes up via Shorebird with new patches that we kind of interpret and understand, okay, what's the diff between what your previous release was and your current release? And how do we want to send that patch down to all of your users? On top of that, just like you see with like the Play Store, we have different tracks for your patches. So you can preview those with your development team, and then you can maybe move it out to a QA team, and then finally out to all of your users, just to make sure everything is working well. So because we are inserted into that build process, we're actually using our own update logic for you transparently, kind of behind the scenes when your Flutter app boots up. So what ends up happening is as your application comes up for the very first time, it says, hey, this was built with Shorebird. Let me go check to see if there's any updates from the Shorebird servers. This is a non-blocking request. If our servers happen to experience any downtime, your application still works without a problem. This is more just, like I said, kind of a background update process. If there are updates, those get downloaded, and then the next time that the application ends up getting launched, those updates will be applied. So right now, the user does have to end up, usually backgrounding an application or force killing it if it was an extreme case. But typically what we see is as your end users are just using their device throughout the day, right? We all know that these mobile operating systems are usually killing applications behind the scenes anyways. So if you used your app in the morning and then you didn't get to it again until in the afternoon, usually that patch would have downloaded and been applied kind of seamlessly for your user.
Yeah, that actually explains a lot. We adopted Shorebird at PewStack as well, the company that I work at. So we build edtech tools where students can watch lectures as per their coursework. And one day we just started receiving multiple emails from students stating that they are unable to play videos anymore, which was the core feature of the app. Upon further inspection, I found that there was an issue with the Vimeo API. I fixed it, but we had to make another push to Play Store and App Store and wait for the review process. That's when I convinced my manager that we need Shorebird to quickly deliver updates to our users.
I think that's the main use case that we hear a lot of people say, right? Is there's something that business critical with my application that I need to get a fix out there now. And I think that's where I'm trying, as I'm talking more and more to customers, I'm trying to kind of shape our messaging at Shorebird to really be around, it's putting the update process back in your hands as developers, right? Rather than having that gatekeeper in the middle. If you read our documentation, you'll see that we don't say this is a full sale replacement for app review, right? We still believe that there's a place for that. In fact, when new users download your application, they're still downloading the original one that you submitted to the App Store. But in these scenarios, or sometimes in other scenarios that we've heard with like A/B testing or certain events that are going on for a certain amount of time, we've seen companies use the Codepush solution and the patch solution to be able to push that out on their own schedule, rather than having to back up their timeline and add a couple days of buffer because they know that they need to spend a bunch of time in app review. This is really prevalent with any app that really also has like hardware functionality or maybe something like if you're on iOS, like a CarPlay application, because there's certain things like that that if your application includes them, you're always going to get thrown into a longer queue for App Store review. It's just the way that those end up working. Some applications I've worked on in the past, we could get a hot fix out in 6 or 8 hours, but it was still like, if something is business critical and like your case, right, the app just stopped working, sometimes 6 or 8 hours is really, really detrimental, which is why Shorebird invested in the Codepush solution as the starting point.
You mentioned a very interesting point that when a new user downloads an app which uses Shorebird, they still get the app that was initially pushed and reviewed by the app stores. And I remember being confused about this. I'm not sure why I assumed that would not be the case. And it makes complete sense now, but I was like, hey, I've already pushed a new Shorebird patch, so now when my users download the app, they should get the updated version.
We do have a kind of more of a manual way of letting you kind of control that update and patch process for that exact purpose. Like I said, you open up the application, and in the background, our updater is working. It's pulling that stuff down. And we've made the choice that we don't want to apply those patches automatically. That we want to apply those patches during a fresh app boot up, just so that we're not throwing anything off for processes that are currently running in your application. But that leads to the exact use case that you're talking about. You get an old, quote unquote, old version of the application from the store. As it comes up for the very first time, it's downloading the patches that it needs to that are on the Shorebird servers, but it's not until the next time that you open up the application those are actually being applied. So to solve that issue, we actually have a Shorebird Codepush package. It's on pub.dev, and that allows you as a developer to understand what's going on with the updating process a little bit more and actually control it. So you can get status updates as to, is my app up to date? Is there an update required? Do I need to download those patches? Are the patches downloaded and just waiting to be applied? And so what we've seen from a couple of customers who have had this exact scenario is they implement that Shorebird Codepush package. They look during the boot up of the application, they look to see, is there an update that's ready to be applied? And when that happens, they put up a pop-up to the user saying, oh, we need to update the application. Click here to close it and please relaunch. And so then they can kind of force the users to have the latest code available.
Yeah, that sounds really amazing. I was unaware of Shorebird Codepush.
Yeah, we're starting to see more and more folks have that exact question come up. And when we mention the Codepush package to them, they seem pretty enthusiastic, because then they realize, hey, it's not just this magic thing that happens. I can have a little bit of control over it, but also know that they don't have to really worry about all of the plumbing on how it all works. They just get the benefit of it.
That sounds really cool. I wonder how App Store and Play Store have the confidence that any app using Shorebird is not going to violate their policies.
This is for sure a let's call it a loophole overall, right? And this is on our documentation site as well, but we really look at this in two different ways. First one is from a technical compliance and regulation standpoint, right, from the app stores. What we're doing is technically above board. Like, we're following all the rules and guidelines. We're able to do this because those rules and guidelines have exceptions for anything that's running on essentially a VM. And since Dart code is running on the Dart VM, we say, check, we have done that because we only operate on your Dart source. So from a regulation perspective, we're in good shape. But the case that you're talking about, we call out in our documentation of, yes, you can use this technology for evil. We don't say that exactly, but that's the connotation, right? That you could get an app through the App Store review process and then essentially fully wholesale change the application with a patch. It's not what we suggest. We believe that if you do that, you will get in trouble, and at some point by proxy, we probably will as well. So we definitely try and that's why we also tell people, we're not an App Store review replacement, right? You still need to go through that process to make sure you're still adhering to all of their guidelines and everything else. So What we've seen with a lot of folks overall is they still kind of keep their app on a monthly update cycle with the stores. That way they know that they're meeting all the guidelines, regulations, all that other stuff. But they're able to send patches through Shorebird within that month to make sure that new features can roll out or bug fixes can go out to make sure that their application is still moving forward. So it's a fine line to walk. You're not incorrect.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. And let's hope it doesn't come to that. Otherwise, Shorebird will then have to have a review team themselves. Yeah.
And that is something I'm definitely not looking to put in place. Like I said, we really want to put the update process back in your hands as a developer or a development team, rather than us now being a gatekeeper as well.
Exactly. Otherwise, Shorebird will then become the same thing that they sought to destroy, which was developer wait time. So, what has the team learned in terms of individuals and organizations willing to invest in a product that is built for Flutter?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing is that the addressable market that we have is just growing day by day, right? Flutter is continuing to grow. I know if you or your listeners had tuned into the Flutter in Production event that happened a handful of months back, the team over there at Google and the Flutter team said about a third of every new application on the store is using Flutter, is being developed with Flutter. That's great for us. We're just seeing the community grow. We're seeing the market grow. But what we've really learned is, marketing is hard, right? Getting people aware of what it is that we do and why we do it is sometimes the harder part. Because like yourself, right? Like sometimes we're late to the process. Someone ends up with a bug or something that's business critical, and they say, "Okay, great. Like I fixed the issue, but how can I not do it do it again in the future?" Whereas where we really want to be is we want to be in the forefront of their thought, saying, "Oh, I need to build this in when I'm starting my project, so that I have this capability no matter what." But that takes a lot of time and energy just to make sure that we're in the right places. People know that we exist. But I feel like from the handful of customers I've already been talking to over my first 3 weeks here with Shorebird, once they get involved with us and they see the technology, they see how powerful it is for them, they go, "Oh man, I had this 2 years ago." So it's great to hear that and know that we've just kind of got this growing market that we can address.
Okay, so it's good to hear that Flutter is growing. Although, how would you describe the job market for aspiring engineers focusing on Flutter, both in established companies and startups?
Yeah, I think with smaller companies, startups, they're able to look at the landscape and say, "Okay, how can we be on the forefront of application development from the start?" So they're able to start greenfield projects without too much of a problem using Flutter overall. Where we see a lot of hesitation is, like you said, with the larger companies who maybe have investments in their native applications for years upon years upon years, and they don't want to tear it all down, which is totally fair. From a business perspective, I wouldn't either. But what we've seen really work is, rather than it being something coming from the top down, is really coming from the bottom up, where development teams are really putting their hands up and saying, "Hey, all the work that we're doing, to be honest, it's a little bit of a nightmare because of the way that we have things architected or the technologies that we're using. But look, I've done some research, and here's a better solution that I think we should invest in." And that kind of then starts to percolate up, like from a senior engineer maybe realizing this up to their engineering manager or their VPs or directors or whatnot, and start to really talk about it overall. Once that happens, what we've seen really good adoption with is kind of exactly what we did back at BMW, talking with companies and being able to say, like, "Hey, could you section off 2-3 developers for 2 sprints worth of time?" Not a lot, just to do some investigation, do some prototyping, so that they can see the power of it firsthand within their product. We always tell them, like, don't try and rebuild your whole app in a month. That's never going to be useful. But what happens if you could just rebuild like your one core use case of your application in Flutter and understand how that works, and if it was faster, was it more performant, like any of those things to like help tip the scales in that direction. It's a process. It takes time, and with anything like that, it's I think worth the time. But sometimes you got to see it firsthand in order to believe it.
Interesting. So, small teams hacking together an app in a new technology and prototyping it quickly really helps in the adoption of that technology within the company. This actually reminds me of a project that I've been working on called Majestic UI for Flutter, which can really help developers in quickly setting up their own application using a CLI. It's actually inspired by shared CN in React. And developers can not only import components but entire screens to put together flow or an app really quickly.
Very cool. Yeah, I think we've got we have something special with the Flutter community as compared to other development communities I've been a part of. Like, I've tried to be involved in things like Ruby and C Sharp and all those other technologies, and I feel like the Flutter ecosystem has something very different that people default to. Hey, I should try and figure out how to make this open source rather than, hey, it's my own and I want to keep it for me. And so it's great to see people like yourself and others just saying, hey, I've got this problem, I'm going to solve it, but I don't want to just solve it for me, I want to share it with the world. I feel like that's a little bit different than a lot of these other development communities, and it's one of the reasons why I think that the Flutter community just continues to grow.
Yeah, totally. I think there's this enthusiasm in developers when it comes to building for Flutter. Coming back to Shorebird, were there any initiatives that Shorebird eventually abandoned, maybe because the returns
Yeah,
were not
I
worth the
know
efforts
from some of
required?
my previous conversations with Eric and Felix that one of the areas that they were looking at was Dart serverless functions, right? Like being able to make sure that your Dart code that you're using on your front end could probably also get moved to the back end pretty easily. I think that there's a lot of other ideas that we've got around building on top of the code push technology that we've already got as well. So that's some of the stuff that we're currently talking about of, hey, when is it time to invest in the next feature on top of what we already have? So the real question for us is always going to come back to what is the thing that's going to make a certain company or certain type of company successful with Flutter in general, right? Like as a technology, because our default view is people should be developing in a multi-platform framework from the start. We believe that Flutter is the right way to start to do that. Others may use other technologies, totally fine, but we really want to further that engagement overall of saying, by default, start with a multi-platform framework, because we see the benefits of it overall. So I think that'll probably be the guiding light for us of like what's the next things on our pipeline and roadmap, with that North Star.
Yeah, serverless functions. I think it would have been interesting to see Shorebird's take on that. Google already has a functions framework, Dart package on pub.dev, and then there are other companies like Serverpod and VGB working towards adding backend support in Dart. So I'm finally down to my last question, which is, can you talk a bit about upcoming features for Shorebird?
I definitely have some of them. I don't know how much I should be talking about any of them right now. So maybe you can have me on a little bit later on, and we talk about that once I get my head wrapped around everything a little bit more as well.
Yeah, I'd love to have you on again sometime in the future. And it was a really insightful experience for me as well, as I'm sure it was for the people watching this.
Well, thank you for your time as well.
Yeah.
I guess I'll also wrap up here by telling people if they have questions or comments or concerns with Shorebird, they could always check out our website, shorebird.dev. On there, there's a link to our Discord server, which is where we essentially run the company. So myself, Felix, Eric, Brian, we're there all day. So we try and provide as much support as we can there. But also, if your company is looking to get involved and use Shorebird, you can reach out to me directly. Usually through Discord is best, and would love to get people set up and using the product.
Awesome. So anyone who has never used Shorebird, just go and check it out. It's really amazing to see live changes on your production applications. If you have anything more to add on, just feel free to do so.
I think number one, I didn't say this before, but like you did a very good job of prepping. Like, you knew my background and everything, which was phenomenal. I've done a few of these where people have just not done any homework. So thank you for that. But then number two, I think the questions you asked kind of got me to all of the points that I wanted to hit. You did a really good job of all of that too. So thank you.
Yeah, I got the clip that I was looking for. Okay, so this marks the end of our conversation. You got to learn about Shorebird, all of its feature, practical use cases, and the very important Shorebird Codepush package, firsthand from Shorebird's founding operations lead. I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. If you didn't, I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and feel free to drop your feedbacks or questions either in the comments or my Discord server linked in the description below.